She wasn't supposed to matter. She had no money, no last name, no safety net, just a dream. And a uniform-stained calm cafe invisible a dade, but decades later. That same maid created the most iconic perfume in history, a scent so powerful. It became a symbol of independence, a global empire born from silence, rejection, and rage. This is the story behind Chanel No. 5, and trust me, it's not the version they tell in fashion magazines. Most people believe success starts with talent or luck. But what if I told you it often starts with pain? What if I told you that from living in silence, she learned how to speak to the world without saying a word? What no one tells you about Coco Chanel is how brutal her beginning really was. Abandoned, ignored, judged. She didn't just climb the ladder, she built one from scratch. And every step was a fight. This wasn't supposed to work. But what happened next shocked everyone. Because the moment she stopped trying to fit in, that's when she changed everything. She was just 12 when everything she knew disappeared. Her mother's death shattered what little stability she had, and days later, her father vanished. Not metaphorically. He literally walked out of her life, never to return. That's the part most people don't know. She wasn't born into glamour. She was dumped into an orphanage run by nuns, where the air smelled like starch and silence. Now this is where it gets interesting. The same cold, rigid convent that stripped her of warmth, taught her to sew. Those needle and thread lessons weren't just chores, they were seeds of rebellion. Every stitch was a quiet act of survival, and survival that became her signature. If you're ever wondering how they built it from nothing to empire, sometimes it starts in silence. Let's rewind for a second. Imagine being a child, watching others get picked up by parents on Sunday visits while you sit waiting. For no one, that kind of abandonment doesn't just hurt, it brands your soul. She wasn't just alone, she was invisible to the world until this moment. And in that invisibility, Gabrielle learned how to observe, sharply, silently, strategically. This wasn't supposed to work. Orphan girls didn't grow up to shape culture. But she refused to accept the script she was handed. The orphanage may have stripped her of affection, but it couldn't strip her of ambition. She had nothing, just a dream. Sounds poetic, but it was also terrifyingly literal. At night, she'd stare at the ceiling and imagine something different. Something hers. The true story of Chanel's success begins here, not on a runway, but in a cold convent bed. And here's the part no one talks about. The minimalism that defined her later designs? It wasn't an aesthetic choice, it was survival. When you grow up with nothing, excess looks loud. Power looks like simplicity. That's why her business transformation felt like quiet revenge. But most people don't know this part. They only see the empire. They don't see the girl who ate crusts of bread and learned early that nothing, absolutely nothing, would be handed to her. That's the story behind every timeless brand you see today. It's not just about creativity, it's about a refusal to stay invisible. That's the real biography of a successful entrepreneur. Everyone told her to give up, not in words, but in the way they looked through her. That cold indifference, it fueled her, it made her obsessed with control, with elegance, with identity. She would build something no man could own. And this is where everything changed. Not in Paris, but in her heart, in a vow to never be forgotten. Again, and so, from an orphanage where dreams were muted, rose a girl with fire in her veins. The nuns taught her how to sew, yes. But life taught her something more dangerous, how to observe power and how to reimagine it, because once she saw what power looked like, she knew what to create. But wait until you see what happens when that invisible maid enters the world of the rich. Before the world called her Coco, she was just another maid, ironing lace, folding dresses, and keeping her head down. She wasn't supposed to be noticed. Her job was to disappear behind the wealth of others. But as she cleaned the rooms of the elite, she was quietly studying them. That's not the full story, though, because while she served them tea, she was planning her escape. She watched every detail, how women walked, how they styled their hair, how they spoke like they owned the air around them. And she thought, why not me? That seed, that dangerous question, was the start of a business success story no one saw coming. From living in a car to owning an empire sounds extreme, but she lived a version of it. A maid with no voice, building power in silence. Let's rewind for a second. Chanel didn't start with fabric and vision boards. She started with needles, scraps, and rejection. She used the leftover materials from her jobs to experiment with her own designs. That's the part no one talks about. The hustle behind the elegance. It wasn't glamorous, it was survival. A startup story born in the shadows of Paris salons. They laughed at her idea, literally, when she told women they didn't need feathers, corsets, and 20-pound hats. Society mocked her. This wasn't supposed to work, but what happened next shocked everyone. Women started listening. They didn't want to just look pretty. They wanted to move, to breathe, to lead. And Chanel? She gave them the uniform for revolution. She proved them all wrong, not by shouting louder, but by designing smarter. Her early hats were simple, elegant, and free from decoration. They said luxury was about sparkle. She made it about silhouette. From idea to empire, her philosophy was clear, less, but with purpose. That's the turning point that changed fashion forever. And it started in silence. Here's the part that no one tells you about becoming iconic. Before you build a brand, you build a belief. Chanel believed women were tired of being decorative. They wanted to be defined. And she wasn't just creating style, she was creating language. A vocabulary of power, worn on the body. Business transformation starts with seeing what others don't. She had nothing, just a dream. And in a world that ignored her, that dream became armor. Every rejection became fabric. Every whisper behind her back became a stitch in a new silhouette. And slowly, people began to notice, not the maid, but the mind. That's the true story of how Chanel began shaping a new world. From broke to CEO, one hat at a time. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The same women who once looked down on her were now lining up to wear her designs. Chanel, the former maid, had turned rebellion into elegance. But the high society wasn't ready for what came next, because while they admired her work, they still didn't see her as one of them, and that would lead to a different kind of heartbreak. He was wealthy, charming, and dangerous in all the ways that don't seem obvious at first. At the end, Balsan offered Chanel something she had never known: access. For the first time, she walked through marble halls instead of scrubbing their floors. But what no one tells you about those gilded rooms is how quickly they turn into cages. Chanel wasn't a guest, she was decoration. At first, it felt like love. He bought her things, introduced her to socialites, let her breathe in luxury. But deep down, she knew she was never meant to be his equal. She was his amusement, a secret. The story behind this chapter isn't romantic. It's a warning: from nothing to billionaire. Not if you depend on someone else's riches. She realized it during a party, while women in pearls whispered about her past. He smiled, but never defended her. That was the turning point. Chanel understood that no man would give her the power she craved. And this is where everything changed. She wasn't heartbroken. She was activated. The rejection, it became fuel. This wasn't supposed to work. A woman in a man's world, breaking away from comfort instead of clinging to it. They told her she was foolish. Everyone told her to stay quiet, play the role. But instead, she started planning her own empire, no strings attached. Here's the part no one talks about. Heartbreak builds empires too. Let's rewind for a second. Most people, after a rejection like that, shrink. Chanel did the opposite. She used his connections not for security, but for strategy. She observed how the wealthy behaved, not to imitate them, but to rewrite the code. That's the business success story people don't see, the one built in the background of someone else's life. She had nothing, just a dream and a broken illusion. But illusions are heavy, and once they're gone, you move faster. Chanel took that pain and turned it into precision. She began designing with a new purpose, not just to dress women, but to wake them up. The true story of Chanel is about freedom disguised as fashion, and this is where it gets interesting. She soon met another man, Arthur Boy Capel. Unlike the others, he believed in her vision. He helped her open her first boutique, but even this love came with loss. Capel died in a car accident just as her empire was growing. That grief became another silent business partner, and it never left her work. That's not the full story, though. Because with each heartbreak, Chanel became sharper. Love gave her the access, rejection gave her the reason. And pain gave her the edge. The woman society underestimated was now building something timeless. But if you think fashion was the only thing she changed, wait until you hear about the perfume that started a revolution. She didn't want to create a perfume. She wanted to bottle a feeling, something raw, honest, and untouchable. "I don't want a perfume that smells like roses," she said. "I want a scent that smells like a woman, and not just any woman, one who's been through fire and came out sharper." That's the true story of Chanel No. 5, a fragrance. Born from rebellion, not romance. At the time, perfumes were predictable, sweet, floral, polite. Chanel wanted none of it. She was done being polite. This wasn't supposed to work. A woman creating a bold, musky, abstract scent. But what happened next shocked everyone. The moment people smelled it, they didn't understand it, but they couldn't forget it either. Now this is where it gets interesting. The business transformation began with the number itself. While others chose poetic names like Whispering Garden or Spring in Paris, Chanel just called it No. 5, simple, cold, powerful. That's the part most people don't talk about. How branding can be louder in silence. She said, "It's just the fifth sample I liked, but that was a genius." From idea to empire, she knew clarity cuts deeper than charm. Let's rewind for a second. The perfume wasn't just about smell, it was about control. Chanel had been a guest in men's homes, a lover in their beds, but this was hers, the formula, the name, the launch, all hers. She created something that didn't ask for approval, she didn't wait for permission. That's what no one tells you about success. Sometimes it's born from exhaustion. She had nothing, just a dream, and a scent stuck in her head. It wasn't flowers, it was skin, salt, clean sheets. The aftermath of love, not the fantasy. She wanted to remind women that beauty wasn't always soft. Sometimes it was sharp, distant, unapologetic. That's the story behind Chanel No. 5, a luxury made from emotional scars. Everyone told her to make it sweeter, softer, more like what men liked, but she didn't care what men liked. She wanted power in a bottle, something that said, "I exist on my own terms." That's not just perfume, that's revolution. She proved them all wrong when sales exploded. And when Marilyn Monroe famously said she wore only Chanel No. 5 to bed, the legend was sealed. What no one tells you is that the success of No. 5 wasn't instant. It almost failed. It sat unsold for months, but the turning point came when Chanel took a risk. She started giving samples to elite women at parties. Word spread like wildfire. From invisible maid to empire builder, she understood something most entrepreneurs forget. Sometimes you don't sell a product, you sell a feeling, and this is where everything changed. No. 5 wasn't just a perfume anymore, it was a symbol, a rebellion wrapped in glass. The kind of scent you wear when you stop apologizing. But behind that glass was still the same girl abandoned in an orphanage. And what she was about to do with fashion would redefine luxury forever. Luxury wasn't Chanel's birthright, it was her weapon. She didn't crave jewels or gowns because they were beautiful. She craved them because they were powerful. The story behind her signature style isn't about vanity. It's about vengeance. She turned trauma into taste. The girl who had nothing, just a dream, created the visual language of freedom. From broke to CEO wasn't a smooth ride. It was a rebellion stitched in fabric. While others decorated women, Chanel liberated them. She cut away the lace, unhooked the corsets, and gave women pockets, real pockets. For money, for cigarettes, for independence. Now this is where it gets interesting. She wasn't designing fashion. She was designing autonomy. Let's rewind for a second. Picture a woman walking into a room in the 1920s, not in a ball gown, but in a black dress. Simple, sharp, unforgettable. They laughed at her idea until they couldn't ignore her. The little black dress became the uniform of powerful women. That's not just business transformation, that's cultural disruption. She proved them all wrong with elegance that whispered louder than trends. Her clothes were armor for women who didn't want to play by old rules. That's what no one tells you. True luxury doesn't scream, it stares you down. From idea to empire, she wove her pain into every hem, and every piece said one thing: I don't belong to anyone. Everyone told her to stick to what worked. But Chanel wasn't interested in repeating history. She wanted to rewrite it. The turning point came when she embraced simplicity as sophistication. In a world obsessed with excess, she made minimalism seductive. She took the uniform of poverty, plain fabrics, clean lines, and turned it into a billionaire aesthetic. She had nothing, no title, no pedigree, no rich husband. Just a brutal past and a sharp eye, and yet she created an iconic brand history that still defines elegance a century later. That's the true story of success, not who you know, but what you dared to reinvent. She didn't just build a fashion house. She built a philosophy, but most people don't know this part, that every fashion show, every magazine cover, every luxury boutique carries the DNA of her rage. Chanel wasn't chasing beauty, she was chasing control. And every jacket, every button, every clean line, a reminder of the girl who once had to ask for permission to speak. Now, she didn't ask, she declared, and this is where everything changed again. The girl once laughed at for dreaming too big was now the woman dressing queens, actresses, and CEOs, but power always comes at a price. And what she did next, during the darkest years of Europe, would put everything she'd built at risk. During the chaos of World War II, Chanel made a decision that still divides historians, fans, and critics alike. She got involved with a Nazi officer, not just romantically, but strategically. That's the part no one talks about, the shadow behind the spotlight. The true story of her success includes moments she likely wanted buried. But history, it always finds a way back. She believed she could outsmart the game, use the connection to protect her interests, maybe even gain control over her brand again. From idea to empire sometimes means walking through fire. But this wasn't supposed to work. Aligning with the enemy during wartime wasn't rebellion, it was betrayal. And when the war ended, the world wanted answers. Let's rewind for a second. While Paris bled, Chanel was living in the Ritz Hotel, alongside German officers. Her excuse, it was survival, but to the French public, it looked like treason. The woman who once gave women freedom was now accused of giving the enemy comfort. That's the turning point that nearly erased her legacy. Everyone told her to disappear. And for a while, she did. She fled to Switzerland. Her name no longer fashionable, it was radioactive. The iconic brand's history was stained. But most people don't know this part. Even in exile, she was planning a comeback. Because Chanel never let shame define her, only sharpen her. She had nothing again. Just silence and a question: could she rise once more? At 70 years old, most people would have quit. But she wasn't like most people. From broke to CEO twice. That's the true biography of a successful entrepreneur. She didn't just survive scandal, she transformed it into fuel. Now this is where it gets interesting. When she returned to Paris in the 1950s, the fashion world had moved on. Dior had taken the throne with his new look, ultra-feminine, ultra-fragile, but Chanel looked at it and said, "We're going backwards." She saw corsets creeping back. She wasn't having it, and this is where everything changed. Again, she proved them all wrong. The world doubted her. Critics said she was too old, too irrelevant. But what happened next shocked everyone. Her comeback collection sold out. Chanel wasn't just a designer, she was a force of nature. A woman who turned even disgrace into design. That's the story behind her second empire, built not from nothing but from ashes. And yet, the controversy never fully vanished. To this day, some call her a traitor, others a survivor. But the empire she built, unshaken, what she did next would cement her legacy forever. Because while the world debated her past, she was already designing the future. From an orphanage without a name to the creator of the most iconic perfume in the world, Chanel's story isn't just legendary, it's instructive. She didn't inherit power, she built it, stitch by stitch, decision by decision, risk by risk. That's the true story of how they built it, not with privilege, but with persistence. She had nothing, just a dream and a refusal to be small. The Chanel brand outlived wars, scandals, death itself. Decades after her passing, women still wear her designs to feel powerful. That's not fashion, that's philosophy stitched into fabric. From broke to CEO, from invisible to irreplaceable, she proved that identity is something you create, not something you're given. And this is where everything changed forever. Let's rewind for a second. The Chanel No. 5, still the best-selling perfume in history. The little black dress? Still the most copied silhouette on the planet. That's the part no one talks about. How true business transformation isn't loud, it's consistent. When you create something that connects with pain, with freedom, with dignity, it never goes out of style. She proved them all wrong, not once, not twice, but every time they doubted her. She was the maid, the mistress, the outcast. And yet she became the archetype of elegance. And here's the part that no one tells you, she wasn't trying to be perfect. She was trying to be free. That's the story behind every timeless brand, a human truth beneath the luxury everyone told her to give up. To be quiet, to stay in her place. But instead, she became the voice of women who wanted more. She didn't just sew dresses, she sewed a new script. One where femininity and power weren't opposites. One where success wasn't inherited, but earned. That's the biography of a successful entrepreneur no school teaches. She wasn't supposed to win, she wasn't supposed to matter, but she did, not because she was better, but because she never stopped building. Even in pain, even in silence, even when the world looked away. She turned invisibility into vision. That's the entrepreneur journey no one warns you about. And yet, the one that changes everything. From idea to empire. From a name barely whispered to a logo seen across every continent. Gabrielle Coco Chanel didn't just build a brand, she built a mirror, one that forced women to ask, what do I want to wear? Who do I want to be? And in answering those questions, they changed too. That's business success when done right. And while statues may be built, fragrances may be bottled, and logos may be printed, her real legacy lives elsewhere. In the quiet confidence of the woman who walks into the room without needing permission. In the resilience of the entrepreneur starting from zero. And in the girl, somewhere, sewing by hand, who dares to dream of something more. So, what's stopping you? She came from nothing. No followers, no funding, no perfect timing, just grit. And a vision so strong it outlived fashion trends, world wars, and public shame. If Coco Chanel created an empire out of rejection, invisibility, and silence, what excuse do we really have? The truth is, most people will never start. They'll wait for the perfect conditions, the perfect support, the perfect moment. But here's what they don't tell you. The moment never comes. You create it. What dream have you put en pause por que no estaba pronto? What project are you afraid to launch because they might laugh? What idea lives in your head but never saw the light? Maybe it's time to do what she did, ignore the noise. And begin anyway, even if it's imperfect, even if it's quiet, even if no one believes in it. Yet, leave a comment below and tell me, what's the dream that won't let you sleep at night? Let's turn silence into strategy together. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or shook something inside, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications and join this movement because here, we don't just tell stories, we unlock empires.